That's great.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our Conscious Conversations. I know we've had a few weeks break, but thank you all for joining us again. This evening, I'm very excited to introduce our guest to you. Dr. Nasha Winters is calling in all the way from Mexico this evening. Thank you much for joining us, Nasha.
Thank you for having me. It's so much fun to see some familiar faces and names on the screen, and I'm honored to be here, Peter. Thank you.
Jenny Levine, who's on the call, she introduced me to you. Thank you so much, Jenny. I actually was told by her that I really needed to buy your book it's just over a year ago now. And so I quickly jumped on my computer and got a copy of it and just have loved looking into it. And there's so many similarities in my journey. And thank you so much for bringing that out to the world and sharing that message.
Well, thank you. I'm so honored. Thanks, Jenny, for sharing that there. And thanks for reading it, Peter, because it's not a light, fluffy read. So I'm glad you started to dive in and realize you could just kind of pick apart little bits wherever you are drawn.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's pretty much how I've always read 5 or 6 books on the go with bookmarks in various places.
Yeah, good.
Can't do one from beginning to end somehow.
Good luck with that.
So this evening's talk, we've called it The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which is the name of your book, Integrating Deep Nutrition, the Ketogenic Diet, and Non-Toxic Bio-Individualized Therapies. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot to cover, and we'll see how far we get, but I highly recommend anyone who's interested in the topic, get Nasha's book. You can get it on Loot or any local bookstores. And one of the things we put in the description, which I've posted in the chat screen, is that cancer will take root in half of all men and 1/3 of all women in their lifetime, which is a pretty staggering number. If that's not a motivation to understand what cancer is and to, get learned about this, I don't know what is. I mean, tell us about that. So how did we get here? I mean, 100 years ago, cancer was almost non-existent, right?
Well, and you're right. It's like, actually, cancer has been part of us forever. And to kind of start with, it's part of us always, that we all have cancer cells in our body, every single one of us without fail. It's why has it unleashed itself so outwardly and expressively in the last, 100 years in a way that it never has before. And we're able to really track those results over many years. And my theory, and it seems to fit because it fits with the timing, is remember in the 1850s, we started to move into the industrial food revolution, which really means the non-food revolution. And we started to really mill all the sugar and flour and salt, which means it was very highly processed into foods that otherwise it never existed in human existence prior to that time. So that's a huge shift in our genetic mismatch, if you will. Like, we're moving along just fine for tens of thousands of years, and then we throw a monkey wrench into the system, and our bodies don't know how to adapt to that. And that was in the 1850s. And we were actually, if you go back and read on work like Weston A. Price and Pottinger and all those guys, they were heeding the warnings back then in the mid to late 1880s to the end of the century, saying, gosh, you guys, we're already seeing so many problems. Fast forward to where we are today, and holy cow, we've only just added insult to injury with even more processed foods, changes to our way we raise our food, raise our animals, raise the food that we feed our animals. All of those things are entirely different. We've added innumerable amounts of chemicals that have not been properly tested. We've also increased our carbohydrate intake exponentially from about 5 pounds of sugar per person per year before the industrial food revolution to an average, depending on the study, 145 to 175 pounds of sugar per person per year. So we can't catch up with that adaptation. It's more catching up with us, really.
Right, sure. Okay, I mean, that's a beautiful overview. We can dive a little deeper into some of those things. I mean, I'm just, often when I talk about nutrition, talk about how, if you consider human evolution and our Paleolithic ancestors, even to as short as just 200,000 years ago, where we were pretty much in a similar form already, it was only 10 to 12,000 years ago that farming even came about, and that radically shifted how we eat. And now only 150 years ago, another radical shift. So,
yeah.
pretty
Yeah, we
obvious
hope
that
we
that
do.
we, our genetics can't keep up with that, right?
Nailed it. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So the other thing that I love about your book is, you go through some very basics around nutrition and herbs, but you also talk about alternative therapies, because at the moment, so many people still think that cut, burn, and poison is their only recourse.
Yeah.
Give us your take on the current perspective out there on cancer and the therapies as they exist.
Sure. Now, one thing for your listeners who, are maybe newer to the cancer arena, we hope you are. We don't want you to be old school at this point, but unfortunately, most of us will have some exposure. One thing, kind of to come back to our conversation about more than ever, about 20 years ago when I started presenting at medical conferences or events that involved, the average population, I would ask the audience, how many of you have been directly touched by cancer, either personally or with a close loved one? And I'd get a handful of hands in the air. In the last several years, I've had to reframe my question. Now I ask the question, how many of you have not been directly touched by cancer or someone very close to you? Now I get maybe 2 or 3 hands in an event that might have 1,000 people in the audience. That's horrifying. Like that happened in like a blink, on the scope of things. So there's that piece. The other piece is we have been approaching cancer from a genetic mindset since about 1917. That's when we first started talking about somatic theory of cancer, which is the genetic driver of cancer. So we've been sort of experimenting in that pool for some time. And in addition to that, we started to, we claimed the war on cancer in 1971, coming on 50 years of, again, sort of an experiment that isn't really panning out very well. And we have been using the same approach over about 75 years, which is known as the maximum tolerated dose approach in conventional oncology today, which is basically we throw everything we can in our arsenal of chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, targeted therapies, hormone blocking therapies. And we hope at the end of the day that the rest of you is still standing to survive this, right? I mean, that's ultimately it. They're trying to eradicate every last seed. And my conventional oncology colleagues would say I'm not even exaggerating this fact. That is, it's known as maximum tolerated dose. That's what it is, MTD. So when you're reading research articles. And then the other interesting thing about the cancer world is that unless you are a board certified oncologist or dental surgeon, you are not allowed to treat cancer. You are not allowed to treat people with cancer. In fact, it's illegal, at least in the United States. So as such, I say to my patients, I'm fine with that. I'm fine because I'm not here to treat your cancer. That's not what I do. I treat you. I treat your terrain. I treat what that cancer seeded and sprouted in. And even people like Dr. Mina Bissell, who's been a long time goddess to me, like this woman's brilliant research brain. She's a well-known cancer researcher. She was saying back in the 1980s, guys, this isn't a tumor issue or a genetic issue. This is a terrain issue. She's who really started having us look at the extracellular matrix, basically where the cells swim around in is more of the problem. So literally the dirty swimming pool is the problem, not what's swimming in that dirty swimming pool. And even as far back, about the same time somatic theory hit the streets, so did Otto Warburg's theory that this is not, in fact, a genetic disease. It's a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and it's impacted by everything that causes damage to the mitochondria. That comes in toxins. Now, this is in the 1920s, way before the toxins we have today and the dietary things we have today, but he was already seeing that things that affected that swimming pool are what made those mitochondria work or not work. And it's the mitochondria that are protecting the genome. And so we got it partially right with somatic, a theory for cancer, but it's not the starting point. That chicken or egg, really the mitochondria being damaged is where they can no longer do their job to protect the DNA of our healthy cells.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Lots to get through there. I mean, it just made me remember that a really good friend of mine, she's a pharmacist. She used to work in a lab that mixed chemo drugs. And I mean, she had to use these crazy hazmat suits in like a sealed environment. And I mean, she said she had to leave after less than a year because she would send out the drugs and basically people just die one after the other after a couple of days, I mean, she just realized she was actually killing these people. So the maximum
Huge.
dose is pretty much going to kill people eventually.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a place too. I want to, as the conversation keeps building here, I also want to be very clear that I'm not against standard of care. I just think standard of care can be upgraded significantly. We can evolve, right? Everything else has around it. Why hasn't cancer care? It basically hasn't changed in 75 years. And the new things we're throwing at it, like, oh, wow, immune therapies, these are amazing, $1 billion answer to something that we are finding we have less than a 20% response rate to. And that we get excited if we extend someone's life by a few weeks to a few months. And then no one's asking, well, what's the quality of that life in those last few weeks or months? And so I know, because I've witnessed it, and it makes sense scientifically, and it makes sense just intuitively, that you could still get a good cytotoxic cancer kill approach without the maximum tolerated dose. And you can do so by supporting the whole terrain simultaneously, push back the cancer just enough to let the terrain come in and do its job, and then don't act again with more interventions until needed, instead of like blasting it, napalming it down to nothing and hoping scorched earth will give rise to something new and healthy. And you've heard those quotes. You can't, just like your friend who left the industry, you can't poison someone back into illness. So how can we use, like the famous homeopaths have figured out, the concept of it really less dose poisons can create these amazing, powerful responses in the body that are hormetic and adaptogenic and immune modulating versus destroying it all. That's where standard of care can be re-envisioned by taking some cues from the homeopaths and other people who've used a very different approach to targeting the cancer cells themselves.
Okay. Reminds me of a meme I saw last week, which is fantastic. It said, taking medicine and thinking you're healthy is like taking out a loan and thinking you're rich.
That is perfect. That is perfect. Perfect. Yeah. And it's so funny how we somehow think, I'm going to take this pill and it's done. When I tell patients when they get to the end of their treatment and they're ringing that bell and they're barely able to stand, to ring that bell, it's like, no, now you're just getting started, because you've actually now created more harm to the terrain than you had at the time of your cancer diagnosis. So we now have to clean up the terrain that was broken prior to your treatment, as well as now clean up the treatment. That's where ideally, wouldn't it be fabulous to start with your terrain, bring in some standard of care that you're supporting all the way through, and then be way ahead of the curve by the time you're completed with standard of care to clean up just that mess versus multiple messes simultaneously. That is a whole nother way to think about it and approach it.
Yeah. Another one of my mentors, Tony Robbins, he always said, physiology first, get your body in line first.
So good. And here's this man, my God, is he like the representation of chi, life force, vitality, mitochondrial superpower function, metabolic function? This man treats his body like a temple, and he has then boundless energy to create and share what he does. But I also know behind the scenes, this man invests a lot of time and energy and effort, which is what it should take all of us to do. We don't just take the pill. We have to do a lot of work in the background to be able to achieve that type of physiology that he describes.
So let's get into some of that work. One of the things I've realized through this COVID process in the world is how little people really know about health. We were talking about schooling before we started here, and there's no one gets taught about health really. I mean, even in medical school, it doesn't happen. So people, get out of that. They're programmed to eat a certain way, to live a certain lifestyle without questioning. And then suddenly they get sick and they're like, wow, how did that happen? Poor me, I'm a victim. So I wonder if we can touch for a minute. You've been saying terrain the whole time. For me, this is such a crux right now, the terrain theory versus the germ theory. And it's not also just the germ theory. It's more like the victim theory. Like I'm a victim of something else outside of myself. And poor me, someone has to save me.
So much here. First of all, that's another time we've talked about sort of the somatic theory evolving in the late teens, early 20s in the 1900s, to at the same time or shortly before that, we had good old Beauchamp, who was all about the terrain theory, and we had good old Pasteur, literally like, happening simultaneously. And it was sort of like someone went eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and the mo landed on choosing Louis Pasteur's theory, right? It's like, cool, this seems like a fit, let's run with it. And we have, despite so much evidence showing that, and again, like Mina Bissel's work is a very good example, but many others saying, okay, actually, if you take that organism and you put it in a different medium in a petri dish, you can make that organism grow in this situation. Or if you put it in this petri dish, you can stop it. Why do we still keep looking at the germ? Why do we still keep looking at the organism? And yet it's the medium in which it's being fed, in which it's growing. That is how it translates into our world today. And you're so spot on that when all of this hit the fan back in February, March of 2020, and COVID started showing up, I wrote a blog on my website. My thoughts have not changed one iota, not one, since then. We're 9 months in now, and it hasn't changed anything. And what I was so hopeful of 9 months ago when I wrote that blog was, perhaps this is finally the call to action. Perhaps this is finally the opportunity, the wake-up call. And it's like, we were literally like a Thelma and Louise driving off a cliff. COVID hit, and I'm like, great, we're gonna put on the brakes. Oh no, we've just driven off the cliff and we have fallen even worse. I mean, my God, in the US, it's like alcohol sales through the roof, drug, addiction through the roof, domestic violence through the roof, sexual violence and, assaults in the home and all places through the roof. We are even more damaged and more traumatized than ever. And we're feeding our faces. When the grocery stores were all being emptied out here, the produce departments weren't touched. They weren't touched. It was like, let me get all my Hunger Man dinners out of the freezer section and all my Cheetos off the shelf. We literally feasted our way through this process and made it 10 times worse. And so it is no wonder when we all have to move in and close up again that we're having spikes, because no one did a damn thing to change the terrain. And that's what angers me, that we did not use, instead of infusing billions of dollars and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of hours of resources into creating a vaccine, which, my God, that's a whole nother story. But to create a vaccine, wouldn't it have been amazing to create food banks, food delivery systems, community gardens, teaching people? We did see a spike. We saw an uptick of people, starting to do their own gardening, and we saw some things that gave us a semblance of hope. But the industrial complex wouldn't have it. So they just kept feeding into the fear monster and kept feeding into, you all just stay locked down and just keep consuming what you were consuming, and we're going to be busily saving your butt with this vaccine we're creating. So everyone's just waiting for that magic parachute to arrive. This is where it comes down to, and it gets my hide chapped so much, as you can probably tell a little bit here, is we are not dealing with the core issues at all. In fact, we're ignoring them, and we're even suppressing them. There was a time when if I talked about dietary changes, do you know how many trolls would come on and tell me how unbelievably rude I was for fat shaming people? And I'm like, okay, I'm not fat shaming. There is like basic evidence and the basic simplicity of, you're obese, you have a higher risk of dying from this condition. You have high blood sugar. Those who end up in the hospital with COVID with high blood sugars have a worse prognosis. You have smoke. You have a vulnerability in this lung region that's already changed your capillary and oxygenation response, and now you've added insult to injury. How is that doing nothing but calling the kettle black in this moment? So we even got in trouble with that, or even within our profession, if we mentioned what we could do, we were actually told by our profession, you can't say that this particular diet or supplement will help someone in this. Like, we literally had shackles. That's why I like being in a consulting role now, because I can say whatever I want. And I'm at this point of my experiences saving myself, saving tens of thousands of other people, or not me saving them, helping them save themselves. I know what it takes to create a good terrain. And that's not being taught, as you said, anywhere. We are a disease management system, not a health management system or health creation system. And that's what I'm literally on this planet to do, is to create a health awareness, to create a healthcare system, and to create a prevention, because the only cure for cancer is prevention of its expression. And that is 100% on us to explore our terrain, see what our blind spots are, and address them head on.
Awesome. Okay, let's get into some blind spots, because I can also talk about COVID forever.
I know, like we're not, but it's, we're having the same conversation. You just put
For sure.
over cancer or diabetes, or they all overlay.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you say in your book is that 95% of cancers died and lifestyle related, which is huge. Again, people who feel like, oh, why me? Why am I the unlucky person? I've been diagnosed. And also the cancer takes decades to get to a point where you get that diagnosis. So tell us a bit about that, and then we can look at some of the factors in diet and lifestyle.
Sure. And that's just it, is we've come to learn that anywhere, depending again on the research, anywhere from 90 to 95%, hello, that's still the lion's share, no matter which way you look at it, cancer is caused by lifestyle choices, and some of those are things that aren't choices. They're just things that we're unaware of. So for instance, when I hear from the tragedy of a parent who's lost a child at a very young age to cancer, those, like, we're not wired to be able to even know how to have this conversation, much less deal with it. But what people don't understand is our epigenetics. So what was a few streams, genetically upstream, and those epigenetics are turned on and off by things like trauma, emotions, dietary lifestyle choices, toxic exposures, certain gene hiccups that make you less able to detoxify certain things. We also don't know, like, we've also started to learn that what the father ate in his youth leading up to him conceiving his child have a direct impact on that kiddo's health, and we also know that what mother was thinking and feeling during pregnancy and what she was being exposed to, whether it was known to her or not known to her, is affecting those outcomes. So for instance, I think about my friend who the only thing she craved through her entire pregnancy was chicken or fish sandwiches from McDonald's. She ate so many of those. I can only begin to imagine the level of mercury in her children, in her daughter. And so, like, all these are just examples of, we are exposed to so many things. We've also since shown that certain vaccinations, the timing of them, especially coupled with certain epigenetics, and we've learned that certain exposures to things like glyphosate and pesticides have a direct impact on things like childhood leukemia. So these poor kids didn't sit there and be like, I'm just going to go smoke cigarettes on the golf course all day and all those chemicals and eat cheeseburgers. They're not doing that at 2 and 3 years old, 4 years old. They're not making those choices, but they're stewing in our choices, not just as the family unit, but the community and the culture around them. That's what's really sad, is they're the victims. They are the victims when I see those situations. So we have to do a lot more. And thankfully, there's some really amazing childhood cancer organizations coming together and studies coming out of this, so that parents can do, like, when I work with parents with kids with cancer, or meet parents who lost their kids, they're like, if I'd only known that I should never have given Tylenol to suppress their fevers when they were a kid, because that's directly linked to a higher incidence of leukemia, for instance. So we teach our parents the power of fever, again, that we have gotten away from in the last 50 years. And this is an amazing inborn system that we have. And we're seeing the same problem now with, here we are back at COVID again, like, we are suppressing this body's ability to actually fight this off and fend this off ourselves. So that's where we start to look at this, that we do have a lot more control than we've been led to believe. And we have a responsibility to help those that don't have the choice, which are our future generations.
Sure. Wasn't it Otto Warburg who said that cancer is caused by weakened cell respiration due to lack of oxygen at a cellular level, and everyone's masked?
Exactly. There's that. And then the other thing, when we're stressed, we don't breathe.
Yeah.
Right. And then many of us are walking around without even knowing how poorly we perfuse, because we just breathe very shallowly. But even Otto Warburg's work, as well as many others since, have been able to show that just simply 48 hours of decreased oxygenation can turn on cancering processes. So we can click that switch on anytime. Like I said, they're always in us. And it's usually something like, when you talk to people, like the work of Dr. Lawrence Lashan, his book was instrumental in my own healing, and has definitely helped thousands of patients, that I've worked with directly. But he talks about, this is a famous psychologist who started to see these trends that basically 6 months to 2 years prior to a patient being aware that they had cancer, to have that diagnosis, some event, life shock event happened, right? Whether it was a major accident, the loss of a loved one, the betrayal of a business or a relationship, an injury, like something big just like shook the system and left it vulnerable because there was something under there brewing that just took advantage of that situation to express. And that's why I always say, cancer is more of a messenger and an opportunity, and it's trying to help you heal and correct those imbalances that have, as you noted, been brewing on average 7 to 10 years, well before it's big enough and loud enough to capture your attention. And it's that big life event that allows it to move forward for you to see and make itself known that you now have an opportunity to do something about it. So it's very interesting how the perspectives are cancer, the way we've been dealing with it for 100 years is cancer is this invader, it's an enemy, we must do war on it. But as someone who understands cancer differently, that it's a metabolic mitochondrial disease, these are cells, cancer is of us, and it's listening intently to our thoughts, and it's feeding on our foods, and it's feeding on our environment. That includes the people you hang out with. That it's listening intently, looking for cues from you. And it is us. So to go into battle with yourself does not really make sense either. That's why we end up with things like autoimmune diseases when we are doing battle with ourselves. And so here's another way to think about it of how can I both listen to and honor it, as well as kind of get it back in line, as well as keep supporting my terrain around it so that it stays dormant and synergistic and harmonious within my terrain.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, looking at internal and external terrain, our internal terrain is often a reflection of our external terrain. And if you look at humanity as a whole and what our planet currently looks like, to me, it's no wonder that cancer is skyrocketing, right? I mean, in some sense, we are the cancer of the planet.
Yes. I had the honor of speaking at another summit recently called the Infinite Gathering. And my topic was the cultural cancer that we live in. And you nailed it perfectly. They are such a perfect reflection of each other. And so it's very difficult when we're living in a time that's even more polarized than ever. I mean, I'm speaking probably to people more across the pond from me right now, but in the US, it is, oh my lordy, it is beyond polarized. It's split down the middle. The more we polarize, the more we separate, the more we lose communication, the more we lose compassion, the more we create this us versus them, the more we create hate. All of those things, every one of those things perpetuate disease, perpetuate cancer, perpetuate progression of cancer cells. Every one of those things. So I'm also watching a lot of things stirring up in patients who've been pretty stable for some time dealing with their cancer. And in these last 9 months, things are really taken off. I've seen more people, like whether it was chosen consciously or subconsciously, leave this planet because they had an out because of that diagnosis. It was far too painful to stick around and face it than it was to go ahead and leave it. And I get that. That's a choice too, right? That's okay too. Not doing it by their own hand, but doing it in this place of, okay, I've worked hard on this, I can let go now. That's a different piece. But we are definitely in a time of cultural cancer, as well as, our own experience. And as the World Health Organization says, as you put on your link for today, we are expected to see cancer levels double by 2030. And as we said in the very beginning, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 2.4 women. So you can't just sit there waiting for your number to be called. You have to start now. You have to start exploring your terrain and changing these outcomes and changing your perspective of the world and renegotiating and navigating your way through all of this. This is our opportunity.
Sure. And your comment that 48 hours of lack of oxygen increases cancer production. I mean, maybe that WHO comment is way under. Sure.
Exactly. It's like that's like we should all take a collective deep breath in and get dust off your Wim Hof apps and your Buteyko breathing methods and get out there and start your pranayama practices again, or just go and take 3 deep breaths. If people took 3 deep breaths before they responded or reacted to something, to a conversation, to a text, to a Facebook post, man, can you imagine how different the world would be?
Absolutely.
Like maybe get some oxygen up to that brain before you act out from it.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
parasympathetic automatic response, and calm down and think clearly. There is no lie.
exactly.
It is a fake line created by mainstream media, polarizing people where none exists.
Exactly. And we just drive that deeper and deeper. So we got to break the trance. Yeah.
So not to put you on the spot, maybe we could just run through your optimal terrain 10 principles or protocols, just so that people get an idea of what it is we're talking about terrain-wise and what they can do, and just a little section on each one.
Sure. So think about your body as a bucket. And within your body of the bucket, you have smaller buckets, which are your mitochondria. And most of you recall your mitochondria from like your 3rd grade biology class of, the mighty mitochondria, the production of ATP, which is the energy which allows us to live. What we've actually been learning about mitochondria over the last 20 years or so is really amazing, because it does a heck of a lot more than we gave it credit to in our, our grade school science classes. So it does not just create the ATP to help energize us, it creates the ATP to create a particular warmth, a temperature, to induce a lot of biochemical reactions in the body that turn on and off all kinds of mechanisms simultaneously without your awareness, just constantly happening. And it also is in charge of apoptosis, how you kill off cells that are damaged and no longer serving their higher good. And it also is basically our anti-aging. So when we rust too quickly, when we oxidize too quickly, that is thanks to poor functioning and poor numbers of mitochondria. So knowing that each of us are like the bucket, we're taking it all in, but down at the cellular, the micro level, our mitochondria are also their little bucket. What drops go into that bucket that make it behave in a particular way? So over my nearly 30 years of experience, I've kind of taken it to about 10 different drops in the bucket. So first, we alluded to earlier, epigenetics. We now have studies showing that 12 generations above you have influence of what's being passed down to you. But the thing about epigenetics, which is different than genetic cause of cancer, is epi is above the gene, meaning we have the control to change its expression, to turn things on and off at will with certain dietary lifestyle influences, etc. So even if you're like, well, my dad died of a heart attack, my granddad died of a heart attack, my great granddad died of a heart attack, so therefore I'm going to die of a heart attack. Well, you might go back and look and realize, nope, they had MTHFR, they had APOE, they had ACSL1, all of these sound like Greek to you, but basically they chose certain diet and lifestyle factors that took a vulnerability and a propensity in their body and made it express. You now have that knowledge because you can guess now when you see that many in a generation, but you can also test and know that I can turn on and off those genes that killed my father and grandparents, and help it make me much better, much healthier, and my children downstream. So that's one piece, the epigenetic piece. The other piece is the metabolic. So we've already alluded to that as well. We are meant to be hybrid engines. We're meant to go in and out because, again, up until about 150 years ago or so, we had this concept of feast and famine. We had these seasonal eatings. We ate very locally. We ate organic, local, all the things now are trendy. We were doing that naturally for millennia, right? And so we had this ability to, when the goings got tough and in the winter months and nothing is left except for what's left in your root cellar, which might be some dried meat and some salted preserved foods of some sort, you move into a natural state of ketosis. Just like in the summer and fall months when the harvest is really around us, we are feasting and we're working more with our carbohydrates. But again, as I talked about earlier, we've gotten stuck in a sugar burning state. We've got a brick on the accelerator of sugar, and our bodies don't know how to deal with that. Because also when we have the brick on the sugar, even though we can use it at different times effectively, we oxidize quickly. We brown ourselves. So when you take in too much sugar, you create this thing called glycosylated end products, which is basically the browning, aging, rusting, decomposing of your cells, your tissues, your organs, your body. Okay, that is where we've got to snap back the reins and go back into our dual burning system. Some of us need to do it more than others, depending on our epigenetics and our previous life, like what it led to and what we're symptomatically showing. We might have to work a bit harder. Others can do it easily, maybe a couple days fasting and you're right there, right? We all have a different metabolic flexibility, and we want to reinstill that into each of us at its best, at its highest good. And then third, toxins, we've alluded to that as well. It's no longer a matter of if you're carrying toxins in your body, it's how much, how bad is it, and how does it interact with the rest of the drops in the bucket. So that's a given. Like my husband can handle the smell of diesel till the cows come home. I get a waft and I'm immediately nauseous and have a headache. I literally am missing the glutathione SNP that's used to process that chemical. I don't have it. So it just poisons me outright. Where he has a really rapid one, so he could probably slug it in a shot glass and be fine. But I just walked it and I'm super ill. You can probably relate. You probably have people in your own family that you can see that. Then we move into microbiome. Oh my goodness gracious. And how, again, this was so ignored for so long until suddenly we can make money from it in the medical field. But even Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut. Every homeopath, every acupuncturist, every Chinese or every Ayurvedic practitioner, every naturopath, we've recognized the integral part of our health response based on our microbiome, our gut, and the health of our gut. Then that leads into our immune system. My goodness, that's the whole piece here, is that our immune system is what's in charge. I call it the 3 M's. It's like the surveillance process that's happening in your body miraculously all the time that says, oh, I recognize you. That's the first of the R's. There's the recognition. And then there's the response. Okay, cool. You're there. Are you okay to be there or not? If not, I should probably get rid of you or put you into a dormant place. And then there's the remember. I'm exposed to it again. Now I should know what to do with it. We're all broken in our 3 R's. Either all 3 of them are broken down or one of the 3, but it makes us much less efficient and effective to have a good immune system. And again, that's impacted by the other drops in the bucket. And then we have inflammation, circulation, oxygenation, we've alluded to already. Then we have hormonal health and the balance there. And then we have stress and circadian rhythm. I put those together in one bubble or one drop. And then mental, emotional health. Those are the 10 drops that go into this bucket. And you could literally have a book on each and every single one of them. But those are the critical players. And we have at the beginning of our book a questionnaire. There's 10 parts to go over the 10 terrain, and each of those have 10 questions. And you simply evaluate that for yourself, and you see where your highest numbers of ticks are. And that's your priorities. Start there. Start with that chapter. See what your blind spot is. Everybody has them. No one is perfect, and no one is expected to be, especially in the world today. But start to evaluate yourself regularly, because this survey will change over time as well. So you might have 3 or 4 things in the beginning, and after 6 months, maybe just 2. And then maybe a year from now, a new one shows up and the others are all cleared up. We're constantly evolving. We are dynamic beings. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about what's adding to the drops in the bucket that are making you move towards wellness and health and vitality and longevity, or towards chronic illness, disease, and death.
Sure. Thank you. That was amazing overview. And so profound. I mean, for those who do get your book and read it, going through those really makes it clear that lifestyle is everything. And when you look at each element of the lifestyle, as you've laid it out in those 10 principles, I mean, it's really empowering for people to realize they can actually do something about what's going on in their lives, and it has an effect.
Yes. And what's really interesting is when the book, the book was born from retreats that I was doing with women with cancer. And they were saying, Nasha, at the end of these 4-day intensives with you, we've been sipping water out of a fire hydrant. So could you please put this into a better, like a book form? And that's what birthed this book, was literal experience where before these 4-day intensives, we'd take the patient's blood, we'd do this immersion, we'd check their blood a week later. You could see the difference immediately. They could see it, they could feel it. Now they had a group of people having a common experience that they could support one another to keep going with it. That was profound. And it continues on today. At this point, thousands and thousands of people have taken part in this in some form or fashion. So now what's interesting is the book is out there, and instead of just like the patient reading it, their family members are reading it. And suddenly they're saying, maybe I should do this to support them while supporting myself. And so it's making a movement on its own to realize that it's a lot easier to deal with this when you have a smoldering ember in a basement versus a house engulfed in flames, right? And so I'm wanting to encourage people, don't wait until you get a cancer diagnosis to pick up and read something like this and start to make the changes. Then get a head start, a big head start.
Yeah, well, if it's 1 in 2 people, then sure. I mean, don't worry about COVID. That's like 1 in 300,000. So just 1 in 2, the odds are pretty solid there. Get the book, understand what's going on, and start changing your lifestyle. So one of the elements I wanted to pick up on is the ketogenic diet. I was a raw food vegan for 7 years, and it was amazing and incredible experience of detoxification. But there were also, challenges for me, which I've detailed over the years. And obviously a part of that diet is it's just very high in carbohydrates. And I had done a lot of fasts, with juices and felt great from them. But it was only last year that I did my first keto fast. I did a week for the first month in 3 months. And the first time I did it was terrible. I felt absolutely shocking. I'm like, what is going on? Then it got progressively better. Yeah. Until now, it's no problem. I can go a week on keto and I feel fantastic. Because one of the things I believed in my early programming through veganism is that, the pH acid alkaline balance is so important, and that determines, cancer outcomes. And I know you mentioned that in the book. I thought if you could just touch on that for a minute, that'd be great.
Sure. So a lot of people, again, it's like we've talked about the DNA, like somatic cause of cancer versus the metabolic cause of cancer. We've also gotten a few mythologies perpetuated out there that an acid environment causes cancer. And what's interesting is that's not true. The cancer causes the acidic environment. And so it's the change in the mitochondrial and metabolic function of that cell that changes the extracellular matrix around it, that creates an acidic environment that draws in more to maintain that acidity. So again, it's like we talked about, the gene will get involved eventually if the mitochondria are sick enough. The same thing is that the terrain will become more acidic over time if the mitochondria aren't functioning well enough either. So I want people to get that mind around their heads. The other thing I want people to understand about keto is it gets so bastardized out there. Like literally when everyone has a gripe about keto, it's because they're reading outdated, very antiquated information, plain and simple. It is, when we look at a ketogenic diet for the cancer patient, it is nothing at all like internet keto, junk food keto, Atkins keto. They're not even the same animal. So literally, and you can do vegetarian keto. I've seen people, attempt the vegan keto, but it's pretty difficult to master. But you can definitely do it as a vegetarian. I have a lot of Indian patients and others for different reasons that have chosen that path and thriving gorgeously. We're able to achieve what our goals are here. But ultimately, what I want people to understand is ketosis is a state of being. It's not a diet. And you can get there through fasting. You can get there through high fat, low carb, which is ketogenic diet. You can get there from just low carb diet. You can get there from exogenous ketones. You can even get there from pharmaceuticals. So there's many ways to get there. And that's where I want people to get excited. It's like, forget about the foods, because ultimately I know there's people, and you can even get there as a carnivore, but in my camp of the type of patients I work with, I don't recommend that. And I know that there are a few people that are seeing powerful outcomes with that. But again, I look at that, maybe it's a short-term issue. It's probably helping some of the microbiome things make a change pretty quickly. But for folks I've seen who've maintained it for longer than a few months, it starts to create problems again. Similar with vegan, like the vegan is like such a clean out of so many things, but then you are dealing with very frank nutritional deficiencies that happen to be the same nutritional deficiencies that our patients with cancer are dealing with. So you either end of those spectrums have like a short-term implication that can be very, very effective, but both can fall off the cliff pretty easily. As you work more towards the middle, again, your biochemical individuality, what your goal is for therapy, what your preferences are, et cetera, you can work people towards a place that gets into that state of ketosis, which is very, very helpful to restore that metabolic flexibility and be able to burn whichever is needed at any given time. And so specific to that, the common thread of all the anti-cancer diets is a very plant-dense diet. So I ingest between 10 and 15 servings of vegetables a day. When I was a raw food vegan for 7 years, I ate less vegetables then than I do now. Okay. When I was a vegetarian for another 20 years on top of that, I ate less vegetables than I do now. And so ironic that my collection of health conditions pushed me into bringing this on board 10 years ago. Well, it was 10 years in August. And my health is better than it's ever been, ever been. And so going into my, I'm finishing my 49th year. So going into my 50s, I expect fully to just get better and better every year, because that's been my experience from what I was eating in my, childhood and teens to what I started eating in my 20s and into my 30s and into my early 40s to where I am today. It's like, oh my gosh, what a difference. And our bodies need different things at different times. So I always tell people, don't follow dogma, follow data. So know your body, do the testing, make sure you're getting whatever nutrients you're needed for whatever goals you are dealing with in your health, and follow that. And when you become more flexible in your ideology, you become more metabolically flexible as well. In fact, I think it's Dr. Hyman who calls it the flexitarian diet, right? I think that's a really good way to put it. Because there's like that idea, like sometimes you need more protein. Like if you just had an injury or an illness, you need a heck of a lot more protein than you did when you were just chugging along beautifully. Sometimes, like women who are still menstruating that aren't dealing with a cancer diagnosis around their cycle, they may need more carbohydrates, right? There might need to be a little spike for that right before they bleed. That's not a time I would recommend women try and do their fast, is anywhere from 3 to 5 days before their menstrual cycle. You'll fail. It will feel terrible. And then people who have never fasted at all, we start with a good old 13 hours a day. See how you do. Peter, you'd be shocked at how many patients cannot do that. I would say 90% of people can't do that comfortably. That's horrific. So all the people today, I want you to all challenge it and let us know how it goes. So by that, I mean, you finish your last meal, say 7 p.m. and you don't eat again until 8 a.m. You can have water. You could even have some herbal tea. You could have even a little black coffee if you get up in the morning. Nothing else. See how you do. See how you feel. People start to realize that they graze throughout the night mindlessly. People start to realize they're waking up hungry. They realize they get out of bed and they got to shove something in their mouth hole before they start to get hangry, or shaky. If you cannot go more than 4 hours without ingesting something, you're metabolically broken. If you cannot comfortably do a 13-hour fast, you are metabolically broken. And so you want to challenge yourself. Again, depending on your medical condition, you might need some guidance there, but you want to challenge yourself. 13 hours should not be problematic for anybody, right? So that is a good starting point. And then once people get to that point, I encourage them to try 16 hours. And then what even the longevity researchers like Longo and others, they're even finding it's not even so much about what you eat, it's about when you eat. And it's about the timing in between, like how long you fast in between. So even just, anywhere from 13 to 18 hours, 13 every day, 16 to 18 hours twice a week can do a whirlwind of good for your overall constitution and your terrain. And then if you are dealing with a chronic illness, especially something like cancer, you can even push that to 3 days a month. So most of my cancer patients are doing 13 hours every day, 16 to 18 twice a week, 3 days a month. And then once they get strong with that, we can work them up to 5 days. And what people like Dr. Valter Longo and others recommend after you've completed your standard of care is for the next 6 months, you continue with a 5-day fast for the 6 months after your treatment, for the cleanup, for the terrain repair, for the rebuilding of your immune system, for the rebuilding of your microbiome, and for the sort of vigor that you can create from that. And now you've also seeded in a deeper ability to remain metabolically flexible. So those are what I get excited about. What's on the horizon is that I've kind of gotten coined as the keto gal, but really I'm the metabolic flexibility gal. And that I want people to not be afraid of it. And we've been using the therapeutic ketogenic diet since the 1920s for pediatric cases, for epilepsy. And these kids go on it and stay on it for life, many of them, or until they grow out of it into their teens and 20s. It is not harmful long-term, but I also recognize in history, we were never just fat burners, nor were we ever just sugar burners. And so today we've all become predominantly sugar burners. In fact, a study from 2018 shows that 88% of Americans are metabolically broken and stuck in sugar burning mode. That means that less than 12% have a really good chance to avoid any damaging effects of things like COVID. or other chronic illness. So that other 88% should not be waiting for a vaccine, should not just be leaning on their mask, should not be just hiding out in their homes and isolating further. They need to be getting themselves into metabolic flexibility, and they need to be making themselves fortified to deal with and adaptable to what's coming at them in the world. And those are the types of things where I try to express throughout the book, and the revision of the book that's coming out in 2022 and others. So we want to inspire everyone to know that it doesn't take that much to start to turn things around very, very quickly.
Sure. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for all of that.
A lot. Sorry.
Well, I totally get it.
Good.
I mean, we could carry it all night, but we are getting a bit late. I wanted to just ask if anyone has any questions. We can do 5 minutes of questions so that you can get on with your day. It's sunny Mexico. So guys, now's your moment. There's a chat screen. Type in your chats. Let us know if there's anything that you wanted to talk about. I mean, the other things I wanted to mention while we're waiting for anyone to ask a question is that, you know, I love how you talk about medicinal mushrooms in your book, which one of my favorites. I have an amazing medicinal mushroom drink every single day with reishi and chaga and a whole bunch of other stuff. You talk about cacao, which is one of my absolute favorites. We have been importing raw cacao forever. It's one of our favorites.
Well, I know you're like a superfood company, so that makes sense. That is well established out there. I mean, I tell people try to eat at least one superfood a day. But you know, my world, it's just every time I eat, there's some type of superfood in there. When you have the opportunity to think of that as your chemotherapy, you know, it's like, or prevention therapy. Wow, it's pretty powerful, and they can be so darn tasty to boot. So yeah, exactly. Good. Oh, good. There's some coming in.
Antonia asks, is fasting good for all blood types?
It is. It is. So this is, again, like, think about, we evolved from a place where we co-evolved with fasting. You know, we've come from long lineages of fasters. Every single religious, organization fasts, except for where we here are in the West. But it's so part of who we are. It's absolutely a powerful tool. Again, if you've got major health issues around medications, please speak with your healthcare provider on this. But I've been able to do some pretty amazing fasts, even like on the Navajo Nation, which is a Native American tribe in the southwest part of the country, where we would go in and they would fast for a week around these very ceremonial dances, and they'd all like cold turkey their pharmaceuticals, much to our chagrin, and they would be drinking nothing but peyote tea the entire 7 days. We'd get to the end, we'd be watching their blood, drawing them every few hours throughout the entire time. It was like a research project we were doing as well. We would watch them go within 7 days from going morbidly obese on a handful of pharmaceuticals, unable to, heal the wounds on their legs from their diabetic ulcerations, to an end of 7 days, completely healed, 40 pounds dropped off, blood sugars normalized, metabolically more flexible. It is such a powerful tool, and we give it so little credit. Yeah.
Amazing. Great. Well, I'm going to do my keto fast next week, Monday, for a week. So anyone want to join? Let's hit it.
Oh, I love that. Bring it. It's so much fun as a group too. We have a woman in the States. Her name is Dr. Mindy Peltz, P-E-L-Z. And she has it's a Facebook page called Resetters. And she basically guides people through these, she sort of does this. She's like, okay, it's time for a 5-dayer. And people do as much as they can. If they can only do 13 hours, great. If you only do 22, great. But she does it for 5. Everyone's talking and supporting each other, sharing their experiences. It's really easier, Peter, when it's done in a group. So I encourage you to get your tribe on board.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's see, Kate. No, let's go back one. Claire wanted to know if there's any chance to come and train with you to spread the work.
So I do have a training program for physicians on my website, Dr. Nasha, drnasha.com. I believe it's under resources, and it's my mastermind for physicians. I do offer that. If people have the ability to order labs and imaging, they can take this program with me. We are, fingers crossed, getting ready to launch basically a patient advocacy training program starting this summer, again, specific to metabolic approach to cancer. So go to my website and make sure you're getting on our news list, so we can let you know when those things are coming. But Claire, thank you. That's exactly the goal. And then Dr. Jenny Levin, who's on here today, my goodness, she's graduated from my program. She can talk to you about that, but she's also a wealth of information, and maybe she can help spearhead some local trainings for folks as well. But yes, thank you for that. We need to spread the word for sure.
Definitely. Kate wants to know, are bone cancers part of the 5 to 10% genetic and diet fasting won't help?
Yeah, so all cancers, so bone cancers, first of all, when someone has a primary bone cancer, it's usually a sarcoma or rhabdosarcoma, or it's usually secondary metastasis. Yeah, those are still very, very much diet lifestyle. So 95% of the time. There's only a very, very few truly genetic things. These are things that affect like kids dying of cancers at very young ages. We don't see these types of genes kill people in their future of cancers. The cancers we get as we get past a certain age are all pretty much lifestyle at this point. The genes might have been turned on because of dietary and lifestyle choices, but bone is an endocrine organ. It's very, very sensitive to our hormones, especially things like vitamin D. If you've been chronically low in vitamin D, and if you've ever taken things like steroids that weaken the bones further, or you've been exposed to a lot of toxicants that love to go into your marrow, those are likely your drivers of this. So explore that and see. And again, fasting helps in every one of these situations.
Fantastic. What did we have next? Magoba said she tried fasting for more than a day, but glucose dropped to 2.7. And then she asked which diet is best for breast cancer because she tried a whole bunch of juice, which is obviously full of sugar, and that increased tumor size.
Yeah. Well, and here's the crazy thing is you have to check both. You've got to be checking both blood and or blood ketones and blood glucose. You can safely have blood glucose around, I don't know what it translates to on your measurements, but in the US, we say it's low below 60. I have patients routinely get theirs into the 30s. But the key is they have high ketones in the blood. There is no danger of having low blood sugar if you have high ketones. If you have both high ketones and high blood sugar, and meaning high ketones, like above 15, then you're dealing with ketoacidosis, which is not a cause of a ketogenic diet. That is a whole nother metabolic condition separate. If you have just low blood sugar with no ketones, you're going to feel like crap, right? So when people are metabolically inflexible, they have to work towards that flexibility, building up the fats, lowering the carbs slowly, so you can get those ketones up and the sugars down. Then it becomes a much more gentle ride. I promise you that. And things like beet juice, apple, carrot, my God, please, for the love of God, do not do that for any cancer type out there. Those are just sugar on sugar on sugar on sugar. So go get my book. Yeah.
I also love that, ketones are your fourth macronutrients, I think has been said. So there are a fuel source.
Yes. And we can thrive just on those. We could go zero carbs forever and live on ketones. That's what I think is so phenomenal here, is that it is, carbs really aren't an essential nutrient. When we don't take them in, our own body creates them. That's what's so stinking cool. That's why if you do too much protein, you can actually make more carbohydrate. Such a weird thing. So we don't want people on the ketogenic diet for cancer to be doing too much protein. In fact, it's actually lower protein than is recommended for the average Joe. So those are some cool things. These are great, great thoughts that people are throwing out here.
Amazing. Antonia says that she's got low in iron and struggles so much to fast. Any tips?
Well, first of all, Antonia, we want to find out what your ferritin is. Iron storage is very different than a low hemoglobin hematocrit and red blood cell. So you need to find out why you have low iron. Most people who have low iron, in my experience, have celiac disease. So get rid of the grains, please. That would be very helpful. You might also have glyphosate or other things. If you eat a lot of grains and legumes, you may be sequestering those into your gut. You can also have a parasite that has these problems. You could also have a bleed somewhere that needs to be investigated. You could also have some epigenetic reasons. Find out why, find out what your ferritin is. If your ferritin is between 35 and 75, you're fine. Your levels are actually fine. And so the struggling so much, when you say you're struggling, I'm assuming you're just feeling like a little whoo. If you have really low ferritin levels, you're having poor oxygenation. And so my ferritin has been in the single digits most of my life. And the thing that gives me the most energy and makes me feel like I'm not iron deficient all the time is being in ketosis. It actually changes how I feel. So the second I start to fast, my ketones come up very, very quickly now, and I feel fabulous, better than I've ever felt. So iron deficiency would not limit anybody from doing ketosis. Yeah, getting into ketosis.
Fantastic. And I think it's good to also just say that when you're talking about fasting, we're talking about a keto type fast, not a sugar juice fast.
Exactly. And I saw something on, I want to speak to Magoba's question about increasing fats cause nausea. So again, I'd explore her SNPs. I'd explore, does she have a gallbladder? I'd explore how quickly she went up on them. I would explore what types they were, how much. There's so many questions. So there's a lot of troubleshooting. And there's a great book out there, Ellen Davis. She has a great book on keto for cancer. I know that's not the exact title, but if you Google her name in that book, it's a super basic like primer on how to apply a ketogenic diet safely for anybody. But it's very guided towards the cancer patient in particularly. So everyone can kind of benefit from it because it's very clean keto when you're dealing with the cancer patient. So when I see that, that would likely be a great starting point for Magoba to go and see if she can step off it and then come back to it a little bit differently, a little bit slower and gentler.
Sure. Last question, Bernard, maybe just stick to celery juice.
Well, you know what? Go for it. If that's your thing, but let me ask you this. What is your hemoglobin A1C? What is your insulin? What is your insulin growth factor? Because again, everyone tells me I was healthy until I got cancer. It's impossible. That is an impossibility. So if you are dealing with cancer or you've had cancer, the biggest driver of all cancers is insulin, mTOR, insulin, PIK3CA, PTEN, IGF-1. All of these are the main drivers in well over 70% of all cancer types. So if you've had it and you're through it and you're still eating this way, you want to make sure your sugars are okay, or you still have the remnants in the soil that could drive this up again. So remember that everyone who's had a cancer diagnosis who's undergone treatment has a 70% chance for recurrence. Don't be that statistic. You have to test, assess, address, don't guess. So if you think that's working for you, please, I beg you to go and test, because it may be, and that would be great. I've never seen it, but it would be great if you could be the outlier, Bernard. So please go take a look and make sure you're not doing something to unknowingly cause harm to yourself.
Sure. Amazing. And then the other question we had was, is this recorded? Yes, all our talks are recorded. I will post the link here on our website. All of the past conversations I've had are on there, so you guys can check that out. It takes just to get them on there, but by all means, check it out. So if any one of you had friends or family that want to see this, I mean, everyone needs to see this, so definitely send them our way.
And beautiful to see everyone, like those of you who are going through this journey, my heart and soul is with you. Been here myself. There is so much more that you can do. You are far more powerful than you've been led to believe. And you can either do this to enhance your own standard of care treatment, or clean up after, or prevent it, from getting away from you to begin with. So I'm really grateful for everyone sticking around for a late evening where you all are and joining us tonight. Peter, what a gem. I'm coming to visit one of these days, I'm telling you.
That'll be great. So as long as you can fly without needing a vaccine, right?
No, that is, I'll figure out a way. I might sprout wings. I don't know. We're working on it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Nasha, for spending this evening with us and giving us your time so freely and your knowledge. Guys, get out there and get a book. Check out a website. It's a wealth of information too. And yeah, have a beautiful day further. And thank you so much for all the work you do in the world.
Thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful evening. Be well.
Goodbye, everybody. See you again next week. Next week, I'm interviewing someone a little bit different, not quite on the medical side, but kind of. It's going to be Shaman Yakov Darling Khan. We'll be talking about invoking your power, presence, and purpose. So that should be amazing. So check it out. Same place, same time. Bye-bye.